welcome to sewing of a reused, upcycled feed bag into this very, very useful fabric-lined tote bag. So we are going to work today on making this really cool bag out of a couple of simple things that you probably have laying around your house. First of all, we're going to make sure you have all of your supplies. And so the most important piece is that you have a feed bag. And so your feed bag can be any size. The size doesn't really matter. But you're going to start out with your empty feed bag. Make sure it's rinsed out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take all of your supplies. Make sure you have those ready. But before we do that, we're going to prep things with your scissors. And so what we're going to do is you're going to cut the bottom probably 2 to 3 inches off, because we want to get rid of this string here on the bottom to make your bag entirely flat. So when we get rid of that, right, we want to have this nice straight line on the bottom of our bag, and that is what we are going to sew into our tote bag. All right, so we finished step 1. We've cleaned out our bag. We have it nice and flat. We've trimmed off that last bottom edge. And now we are ready to measure this out on our fabric. So for this project, you're going to want at least 1 yard of cotton fabric. So I have mine out here. And then you're going to want a pen or a marker to be able to trace the bag onto our fabric. And so I'm going to lay out my fabric. And then I'll show you in this next step. We're going to be step 2, how we're going to measure the fabric out based on our bag, because we can't have specific measurements because every single person's bag is going to be slightly different. So we're going to use this as a template to trace onto our fabric. All right. So I have my fabric all laid out. You'll see mine has kind of 2 distinct sides. And you can choose to do this one of 2 ways. You could lay your fabric all the way out, so it's a single layer, or you can have a fold line that you can only trace your bag once, and you're really going to be cutting out 2 pieces of fabric at the same time, because you're going to need 2 pieces of fabric that are the same size as your feed bag. And so you're going to use this as a template. So I'm going to choose the method where, right, I cheat a little bit and I have it folded in half. And then I'm going to line my feed bag up on top of my fabric. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace with my marker or my pen on, right, the exact lines of my bag. And so once I have that, we're not going to cut yet. We're just going to trace. We're going to do that, and then we're going to pause because we're going to add on, right, with our ruler, a little bit of a seam allowance on one of the 2 sides of our bag on the long edge. All right. So I've gone ahead. I've traced my bag, right, onto the doubled up fabric. So there's going to be 2 pieces when we cut. But as you'll see, right, I now have my line that is the exact size as my feed bag, right, whatever feed bag I'm choosing to use. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a ruler, right? You can use a tape measure, a regular household ruler. You're going to take whatever you have available, and you are going to add a 1/4 inch of a seam allowance on either side of the bag. And so because I'm working with the folded edge, I'm going to add a 1/2 inch, right? I'm going to measure a 1/2 inch out from here and draw another line just on the side. Okay. If you were doing this where you traced your bag in the middle, you could have a 1/4 inch on either side. That's going to give us the same amount, but we want to leave a little bit of an edge, because when we sew our fabric together, it needs to be the exact same size as this bag, and we have to have that edge for sewing. So I've got the 1/2 inch seam allowance up one side, right, which is going to be the same as adding a 1/4 inch to both sides, but I just have the one. And so that made my fabric just a little bit wider than my tote bag. The height has stayed the same. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go and we're going to cut along that outside line of our fabric. And so you should end up with 2 pieces of fabric, right? It's going to be the front and the back of the inner bag, the fabric lining that will go inside of your feed bag. And so we're going to go ahead and cut along that line. I have a fold, so I'm also going to leave that. I'm not going to cut along that edge. Some of you, if you traced 2 pieces separately and didn't have a folded edge, you're going to end up with 2 separate pieces, and you'll just have to do an extra stitch along the side to get the bag back together. But in this case, I'm going to leave my folded edge, and I'm just going to cut this out, leaving this one connected. So we have our fabric cut out. I have 2 pieces. In my instance, they are facing each other, right? We have the right side of the fabric. I have this edge where it's connected. And what we're going to do is we're going to flip this inside out. So if you have one solid piece, you are going to take this and you are going to flip it inside out, right? So you have the right sides together, and you're going to flatten that back out. If you had 2 single pieces, you're going to do the same thing. The good side of your fabric, right? Those right sides are going to be facing each other, and you are going to lay that out. And what we are going to do is you are now going to use your sewing machine, and you are going to sew along the long edge. I have my fabric at the table now, right at my sewing machine. And this is where I'm going to sew this long side seam. And I used a nice thick marker so I could see kind of where my stitch line is when I flipped my fabric inside out. If you used a pen or something lighter, you might have to measure again, right? So you have a guideline on the back of your fabric where you're going to be sewing. And before we put this in the machine and we start sewing, we're going to want to either clip this with something called quilting clips, or you can use regular stick pins. So you can put your pins in, right, all along your fabric, or you can use something like these quilting clips, which I prefer. You can get these at any sewing store, lots of different online shops. The nice thing is they just clip right on and you don't accidentally poke yourself, and they sit nice and flat in the back. So this is just helping us so our fabric doesn't slide around when we run it through the machine. Right, so on my machine, each sewing machine is going to be slightly different. I have my thread loaded on the top. You're going to have a bobbin that should be loaded with thread. Somewhere inside of your machine, you'll have to read your machine's manual. So I'm going to drop the presser foot, which is this thing, right? And my feed dogs, these little grooved edges on the bottom of my presser foot plate, those are engaged. So those are up, and I can feel those rough bits. And what that's going to do is that's going to help pull our fabric through the machine as we start to sew. So I drop my presser foot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a lock stitch to start. And so on your machine, you might have a button if you're on a modern machine that shows how to sew in reverse. So you're going to sew a 1/2 inch to 1 inch forward. You're going to press that button or engage that kind of reverse stitch, and you're going to go back for a 1/2 inch to 1 inch, and then you're going to continue on sewing forward. When we get to the end of our fabric, we're going to do that same lock stitch again. So we're going to sew off of our fabric, go into reverse to lock that stitch in so it doesn't come unraveled, because you might be carrying super heavy stuff in your tote bag, but this will make it a little more sturdy and make sure that stitch doesn't come undone. So I've got my machine ready to go. I have the presser foot down. Those feed dogs are engaged, so they're going to help me pull this fabric through. It's set to straight stitch, and then I'm going to start sewing forward. There's me going in reverse. And now I'm going to follow along my line. Right. In that nice straight stitch. Oh, getting off my line a little bit. So now I'm coming to the edge, and I'm going to go just to the edge of the fabric. I'm going to put my machine in reverse again, and then forward to get that stitch to lock at the end of the seam. Right? Undo my presser foot, trim my string, and now you can take out whatever. You might have been taking out your pins or your clips as you went. I was able to leave them in as I sewed. And so now, right, I'm going to trim those edges, and you're going to flip this, right, inside out just to check. You don't have to flip it all the way, but just check to make sure that your seam your seam stuck, you don't have any gaps, right? We were far enough from the edge that we know, right, everything should have worked. It's not coming undone because we locked it in there, and we have a nice, clean, straight stitch. So for now, we're going to leave our inner bag, right, that fabric lining, we're going to leave it inside out. So once you've checked it, you've trimmed it up, we're going to leave it inside out, and we're going to move on to the next step, which is getting your feed bag ready to do the bottom seam, and then getting your inner fabric ready to do the same bottom seam as well. We have it stitched along that long edge with just a single stitch, and I've got an open top and an open bottom yet. And so this should line up to be just about the size of my bag, right? Because we left ourselves a little extra here. And what we want to do now is we are going to trim the top edge of just our plastic bag. Because when we put the fabric liner inside of this, we want to be able to fold over and have some extra fabric to make a nice, neat edge on the top of this. So if you see this sample bag, right, we have the inner fabric that's going to come out and get folded under to have a nice finished edge at the top of our bag. So in order to have that extra bit, right, and kind of to get rid of this, the top of your bag will probably have some perforations, right? We're going to trim, and you can decide how much you trim, but you want to take at least 2 inches off the top of your bag, and you want to make sure that's cut in a straight line. So for me, I'm going to use my ruler, right? And again, you can use a rotary cutter, or you can use a scissors. So I'm just going to take a marker, and I'm going to mark on my straight line, and then I'm going to cut that off with the scissors. So we are on step 5, which is going to be prepping the bottom edge of our liner and the bottom edge of our feed bag. So the first thing we need to do is to flip our feed bag inside out. So my nice printed side is on the inside. You can be pretty rough with it. This stuff is pretty tough. But I've made sure that I've lined it up so the front and back images of my bag are right in the center. And so most bags will kind of have a natural side panels, and you want to evenly fold those down. Because when we flip this right side out, we kind of want our, the images and the words on our bag to be centered. So what we're going to do now is we are going to mark a seam line that we are going to sew. We're going to sew on the bottom edge of our bag, about 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, whatever you have your machine set to, kind of whatever your preference is. And you're going to mark that on your bag. And so I'm going to go with 1/2 inch. The key is that whatever you choose to mark, right, from the distance edge, so mine was 1/2 inch. If I marked 1/2 inch on my feed bag bottom, I also want to mark that same exact measurement up from the bottom edge on my inner liner. So mine was 1/2 inch. I'm going to do 1/2 inch on my inner liner as well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put some pins in here and some clips, and we're going to go to the machine, and we are going to straight stitch both of these bottom edges. So I have my feed bag on my machine ready to go. And one of the things to just be aware of is that sometimes this is really slippery in your machine. So some machines are going to want to pull even harder, and some of them might kind of slide side to side. So you want to go really slow. You're going to do your lock stitch and then sew that straight stitch all the way down the edge. Now on my that same measurement that I have on my fabric liner, right, the same distance that I had from the bottom edge as I did on my feed bag, I should have marked out neatly on my fabric liner. We're going to do the same thing. Lock stitch, straight stitch all the way down, and then lock it again at the end. So now that we have the bottom edge of our bag and liner sewn, we are going to prep what are going to be our corners, our bottom corners of our bag. And so in order to do this, this is probably the trickiest part of the entire tote bag making process. So it's going to take a little bit of patience, but the first step is relatively simple. We are going to go from the line that we sewed up 2 inches and in 2 inches. And so if we take your ruler, right, you can mark out where that is. I'm going to just do this, right? But this is my, right, 2 inches in and 2 inches from the side. Same thing on the other side, right? Make sure we're measuring from our stitch line, not from the bottom of the bag. But I have my 2-inch mark, and there's that 2 by 2. And you're going to do this on all sides of your bag. So you can see I already have it here, right? I measured 2 inches up. I did a line all the way across, but my stitch line is down here. So my 2 inches in and up, 2 inches in and up. And then we're going to do that same exact thing on our inner liner. So my stitch line is here. I've gone 2 inches up and 2 inches in, right? Which puts me right there. When you get to the side seam that you sewed, right, you want to make sure you're using that as your line of measurement, not this raw edge of fabric. So my stitch line is here. My bottom stitch line is here. We go 2 inches in, 2 inches up. Okay, and I've marked that on both sides of my fabric, because now what we're going to do is we have to kind of nudge this into getting a flat bottom where we can fold our bag on those lines, right, to kind of make this neat little corner. And so we should fold it so that our dots line up. Our dots have lined up. You can use a marker, right? We can trace, but we are going to sew between those 2 dots, okay? And so this is kind of a tricky part where you got to work with the bag and kind of smush everything over, because you are going to join those 2 dots together with the line, okay? You can use a ruler or just kind of eyeball it, but this is going to happen on all of the bottom inner corners of our bag. And so when we fold this out, it's going to make us a nice, neat box corner, right? A really nice square corner when we do this. So I have this side marked. This is where I'm going to sew. If I do that same thing on the other side of my bag, right? I flip this, so I make a nice, neat triangle. I line up where my dots are, okay? I'm going to connect my lines, and that is where I'm going to sew. And so I want to make sure I'm not sewing any of the extra bag accidentally underneath, just that nice neat corner. And we're going to do that on all of these edges. So the same thing with your inner fabric, you pull that, right? It should make a nice neat triangle. The fabric is a little easier to work with, right? And I have my dots, and that is where I'm going to sew. And so if it's easier for you to mark it, right, you can kind of connect your dots. You can use a ruler, but that is your sewing line for those inner corners. So now I kind of have poofed out the bottom of my bag. It's still inside out. Do the same thing on this side. I'm going to make a nice, neat triangle. Fold that part under, right? So you're not sewing over it. And I've got an extra line that you can just ignore. But I have my dots, okay? Connect them, and that is the line I'm going to sew on. So on both of the inner ends of your bag, right? And you can kind of work with this inside seam. We are going to sew both of those. So as you can imagine, when we flip this back inside out, it's going to make a nice, neat kind of square bottom, because we're going to sew this and then cut off these edges. So we're going to do our same lock stitch, straight stitch to the other side, and lock it in again. Pull that and trim. Flip our bag to the other side. You might have to kind of push that out of the way. We're just sewing those layers. So now I've moved on to doing the same thing. This looks a little funny because I have my, you might have a little extra seam allowance. You can choose to sew with it. You could cut this a little bit closer. It's up to you. I'm just going to fold it nice and flat. And I'm going to sew that inner corner of my box edge. I finished sewing this edge. We're going to move on now to the other box corner. And one of the pieces with this fabric that you're going to want to keep in mind is that I sewed my seam over this direction, okay? Not the end of the world if you get it kind of twisted, but what'll happen is you'll have a little it'll bunch up in the middle bottom of your bag. So if you want to have that nice and smooth, when you get this corner ready to sew, you just tip that inner seam over so it's facing and laying flat in the same direction as your other corner. So I've got this ready to go. Oops, my things are lined up. Flatten that back out. We have our bottom box corners, right, of our inner liner bag. Those are sewn, and so are the inner corners of our outer feed bag. And so now what we're going to do is we are going to trim off this excess chunk. And so we're going to be really careful. We're going to go, you can measure it or you can eyeball it, but you just want to make sure you're not getting too close to that seam. But I'm going to take my scissors and make sure I don't have anything behind that I'm accidentally cutting. And I'm going to trim off that extra corner. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go up from my seam. I'm going to flip this around to make sure I'm not cutting anything underneath it. Right. I'm going to cut this off as evenly as I can get it without accidentally running into my stitches. Okay, so I have my inner bag all sewn and cut. And I'm going to do the same thing on my feed bag. So this is a little easier because it's stiffer. I can see my stitch line. I'm going to move up and away from that. Cut that corner off. Cut this corner. You can trim any of that extra string if you want to. And now what we're going to do is we're going to flip our feed bag, only our feed bag, we're going to flip this inside out. I have flipped my bag back to being right side out. So we finished, we clipped the inner corners. I have flipped it inside out. And as we do that, right, if you use your fingers to push those corners down, you'll see that it's made this nice square boxy bottom, right? We have nice neat corners, and that's now the bottom of our tote bag. Okay, so we have that nice and neat, that we've turned back right side out. We are going to leave our fabric inside out, because when we stick this inside of our bag, as we start to assemble the actual tote bag, we're going to see that this bottom, this nice square bottom, is going to line up really neatly. So we slide that in there into the bottom of our bag. Right. Kind of fold the edge over. This is how it should be, right? We should have that top edge. We measured it to be bigger than the outer bag. Kind of fold this up and over. And then we're going to use your hands, and you are going to neatly line up the bottom corners of your tote bag with the bottom corners of that liner. And you'll see why we left it inside out, because now when we have this flipped over, when you open up your tote bag, you have that nice right side out fabric, whatever fabric you chose, showing really neatly with nice clean seams that are kind of hidden in between these two layers. tucked away. So those match up really, really nicely. And the final step for this part of our bag assembly is we are going to use our pins or our clips to get this upper edge kind of secured into place. So whether you have clips, clothespins even work for this. I'm going to use my quilting clips, but this is a great time to kind of work that liner into the bottom. And then as you go around and you straighten that out, right, you are going to clip or pin or clothespin that liner to the top edge of the bag. Okay, sometimes you might have to like work it up a little bit with your fingers, but it should be relatively even because we made nice straight lines that we measured. We should have, here it's a little bit shorter, so I know I can pull a little bit more, but we now have an edge, right, of right side out fabric along the whole top of our bag. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to fold, because this is kind of a raw edge that'll come unraveled, is we're going to tuck this under. And so depending on how much overlap, right, we measured, you cut, 2 to 3 inches off your bag. So that should be the distance we have left of our fabric. So I like to make a nice big hem or fold over on my bag. So I know that when I stitch it, I'm getting all of the fabric and it's not going to accidentally like pop back out. So I fold that over nice and neat. Okay. So my hidden raw edge is underneath there. I just work my way around, pinning that or clipping that underneath itself. And so I'm going all the way around the edge of my bag, right? Tucking that under. And this will take a little bit of time and patience as you work your way around the bag because it is a little bit slippery, right? The fabric on this tote bag plastic. But you want to make sure that that is nice and even all the way around. Okay. You use as many or as few pins or clips as you want. I find it more helpful. The more pins or clips you have for this part of the project, the better. Just because it really holds things in place as you're working your way around. So now you can see I have that top edge of my bag, right, neatly clipped and pinned. And you have 2 choices now. One is to sew this on your sewing machine, which can be a little bit tricky because you're working with this slippery plastic. But you could put this into your machine and sew a stitch all the way around, being really careful not to sew over, right, or accidentally sew 2 layers together. But what I actually prefer is to do some hand stitching because it's a lot easier to get a nice thick hand stitch, right? If you're doing a straight stitch, you can do a decorative stitch. So I would just take a sewing needle and some quilting thread. If you have some embroidery floss, you can pull out some strands of embroidery floss, double or triple them up to make it a little bit thicker. And then you can do a nice straight stitch, right, by hand. You still tuck them in, right? So you can use a matching thread or a thread that's contrast if you trust that your stitches are going to be nice and neat for people to see them. And you're going to run that all the way around the edge of your bag.